Hello, addicts. I'm Michael,
And I'm Josh.
and today we are covering Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? Or DanMachi, a much shorter name. Today we're covering this 2015 anime series. Recently we covered the book, which was a continuation of this. So now we're going back and backtracking a little bit and covering the entire first season. So here is Josh with the plot summary.
Okay, so to kind of give you a brief idea of what this show is about, it's set in a fantasy game-like world that follows the story of the character and main protagonist named Bill. He is part of the Hestia Familia, which familias in this world are basically like clans or guilds. And if you think along the lines of some like online games, it's basically a good representation of it. And throughout the entire story, we see Bell really grow and basically follow him as he goes on his quest to become the strongest adventurer in the world.
Now we will continue our discussion on DanMachi with characters and some of the world-building elements, including levels and familia. Josh?
Yeah, so basically, before we get into the characters and stuff, I want to kind of give the baseline of like stats because that's a really important part of the characters and how they make them unique. So basically, each character has certain attributes that they are have as expertise, and then ones that they're like not as good in, or they have special abilities that up their status. So, like for instance, the main character Bell. He has a magic ability that he gets that is basically like a fireball, and he has basically like a perk on his magic that basically makes it to where he can fastly cast it, so he doesn't have to have like a conjuration time. He basically can just say one word and it'll automatically go out. Another one of the examples of this would be his Argonaut's skill,
Yep.
which is basically a slow skill that builds up over time that allows him to have like a very devastating blow that kills almost anything in one shot, or at least lower level stuff that we see. I mean, it scales to their levels, which another important aspect of the stat system is their levels. Levels are I'm trying to think of a good game to reference this. This is
God of War is pretty similar with levels, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a very good one. God of War. If you've ever played that, at least the new one, uh, like the max level you can get is like 7, like 6 or 7. And I mean, that's not a lot of levels, but you can definitely tell a difference between when you're level 1 and level 7. You have a wide range more of like abilities and skills that you can use. And that's basically the same sense with DanMachi. The characters at level 1, they're very weak considered, which technically they do have a stage before level 1 where they're basically considered like not even adventurers. But once they get to level 1, they're still classified as adventurers, but they're not by any means like really respected. But like even like a level 3 is considered pretty high tier because the highest person in the entire world is basically Bell's idol, which is level 6. And there are a couple other characters that they're hinted at that we haven't gotten a specific number of what they are, but we do know that they are pretty high class. But getting onto the characters, there's Bell, who is the main character. We have Hestia, which is his goddess, who's in charge of his familia. We also have other characters that help him along his way, such as Welf, who is a blacksmith that helps create magical items, but he has some things that make him stand out as well. It's like he can make really good magical items, but he chooses not to because he wants to be the best blacksmith to make regular items that can beat magical items. As another person that's part of his small group is a character called Lily. She is a non-human. They classify her as a prum, which there's a lot of different races. They have like werewolves. They have like fox people, so they're different. But then they also have the more traditional ones, like they have elves and like Amazons and stuff like that. So there's a lot of diversity in what all these people can be and what some of them are. A lot of the main ones are humans, so there's not much difference in there. But getting back to Lily, she's the main supporter. She basically has the job of just like going through the battlefield and collecting basically their loot from the dungeon. Um, As far as other characters, there are other characters that you'll see that are important characters, but they're more side characters, not the main focus. For instance, Belle's idol, who is, they don't say her first name.
Ainz, I think.
Okay, I guess that is right. Ainz Wallenstein. She is the, like I said, the highest level adventurer, and she's well respected throughout the entire city. And at first, this is a character that we see very little of, but we do see a bit more of her and kind of get an idea of who she is. There's a little bit other characters, but they don't serve a huge pivotal role, I'd say. Is there any other ones that you can think of, Michael?
I mean, I don't know how much you talked about Hestia. And
Okay,
like,
yeah, you could go into her.
so Hestia is kind of the Belle's god, or it's almost like a, well, it depends who you're talking to, but it's almost like a parent, like guild leader relationship.
With the Familia, it's basically set up like a family. Like, I mean, it has guild and clan aspects, but it really is like a family because a lot of the deities that are over the Familias really have a parent to child relation. The deities even call them their children. So there's a lot of that, which goes into kind of the relationship between Bel and Hestia. Bel is somebody that has grown up and he's been taught about how people should treat the gods, whether they are their familia leader or not. And he has a very respectable mindset towards basically every god, at least from just base interpretations, or I should say, first impressions. But Hestia, he is somebody that he really loves, but more as an admiration thing than anything. Hestia, from the other point, she is more of a more on the lower of the totem type of god. She's not really as taken serious or respected amongst the other gods. So she comes from a lower background in terms of deities, but she still has a pretty good high standing in terms of like the world. But her relationship with Belle is very different because she has a more emotional and type, would you say, kind of romantic. It's not a romantic relationship. It is more of romantic feelings on her part. So that kind of plays into the aspect of how those characters interact. And we can kind of see this as the whole title is with is it wrong to pick up girls in a dungeon? There are a lot of female characters that have connections to Belle and the others that not specifically have romance, because there's hardly any romance throughout this entire show, but they do have aspects that you could say like, oh yeah, they definitely like one of them likes the other. And so that plays into some of the characters' aspects. But those are mainly the main ones. There are some other characters that you'll meet later on that possibly can play more of a pivotal role later after the first season, or maybe show up briefly. But that's about all of the characters that we want to go into.
Well, there's several moments. The story in general, to keep it again spoiler free, is it's a redemption arc, in a sense for Belle. He has a foe who's a minotaur at the beginning, and there's a foe who's a minotaur at the end. And the results between the first and the last battle kind of complete the arc for Belle in being an adventurer.
Comes full circle.
Yeah, he's not going to be the strongest adventurer at the end of the season. I think that's not really a spoiler. That's not. This isn't the kind of show where he's so super overpowered,
Right.
and he's going to destroy everyone. It's a show of the family growth together and his growth as a character, little by little.
And that's one of the things that makes this show really unique, because a lot of anime shows or just Japanese stories that at least I've been experienced to, is a lot of them have very capable or powerful protagonists that can do a lot of things, and maybe they struggle more with internal things than they do actual like other opponents. But in this show, it balances those two aspects really well. It makes you feel a little bit more relatable. It makes him a little bit more real as a person. He definitely has struggles. He definitely has aspects that are considered weaknesses, and there are parts of himself that he even knows are weaknesses that he gets told by a lot of people. And he's not the strongest person. Like Michael said, from where we see him, he's definitely not. And where we end, we know that he's definitely got a long ways to go, but we do see a lot of growth, and not only his character, but also in his abilities. So, in terms of like my favorite moments, I really do like whenever he gets into a part of the story where he really has to push himself, and because a big theme of how people level up is they have to push themselves almost to a breaking point where it's either life or death, and every single time they level up, they have to top that every single time. So there's several parts in the story where he has some of those types of scenarios that he goes up against, and I think every one of those is really interesting and entertaining because there's aspects of how he levels up that can't change, and when you see the kind of things he goes up against, you're really asking yourself like, how does he keep himself from changing in certain aspects of himself, but also get stronger and not let that go to his head. And I think that's a really cool aspect too that I really like, and it's a theme that goes throughout the entire show.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments. I think that one of my favorite moments in the show is the dungeon itself, him actually going to the dungeon and fighting monsters. And a lot of animes of this kind of genre, it doesn't show too much. It either shows a lot of fighting just the bosses, but it doesn't show like the daily grind of the dungeon. Which
Yeah.
there's like a couple episodes where he fights in the dungeon, and I love those scenes because it's a life or death struggle, like Joss was talking about, and he's not invincible. The characters around him aren't invincible, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
Yeah, I will say that like Michael said, the parts of the episodes where they're in the dungeon are definitely ones that have your interest the most at times, because there's so much going on and there's so many people with him that there's a lot of things to kind of like have your attention to in a certain aspect. For instance, like there's one part where he has two or three people with him, and they're characters that you generally care about or at least like at this point. And the things they go up against, you're like, man, I really don't want to see anything bad happen to these people. And it's really interesting to watch that and see those moments. I personally like throughout the first season and the whole series in general, one of my favorite characters as well. So I do like every moment that he's in, especially his interactions with Belle. They have a kind of brotherly type bond, and he serves as the bigger brother to Belle. But it's interesting in that they're both capable. But since Belle is the main protagonist, obviously he's going to have some things that Wilf really admires, and it even inspires him. And it's really those scenes I think are just really cool to watch, especially for somebody that really hits home with.
So moving on to the ending specifically, what were your thoughts on the ending, and I guess kind of a show wrap up in general?
Well, I will say, uh, from the stuff that we've covered, uh, going on beyond this story, the ending of the show is not my favorite aspect of all the story that I've seen. But in terms of strictly the show, I mean, obviously, I thought it was really good because it was enough to get me into reading like a 3,000 page volume of it. So, but I really did like how they ended it. I thought it was a realistic way because they had him go up against a really big trial, but it didn't seem unrealistic because of the help and support he had. I thought it was a good way to up the ante of things that they already set through, but keeping it still realistic and grounded to his abilities and how far he still has to go. I thought in terms of a final ending that it was still really gripping, and like there was a lot of like points throughout the episode that I was sitting there thinking like, man, how are they going to overcome this? And it was a blast to watch, and I thought they ended it pretty well. There was no cliffhanger that I was frustrated with. I was like, man, why did they do that? You know, because there's such a long wait in between. You don't want those kind of cliffhangers. And I thought they did it in a way where if they never do a second season, or you never watched it until like years later, you would be completely fine with walking away from this first season and being like, that was a complete story. And I completely stand by like saying that I liked it, you know. But yeah, that's basically my take on the whole arc and way it ends.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add there is in some ways, I wish it ended with the second Minotaur fight, which kind of would have ended the arc better. But I like the ending, and it made more sense that they didn't end it while they were in the middle of the dungeon. So
Yeah.
I understand why they ended it there. In regards to speculation, we can't really speculate on the direct future of this because we did recently review the next book, book 6, which is a continuation of that. So simply, we're all waiting for season 2, and we can maybe do a video speculating on what they're going to cover. But at this point, we can move on to our recommendations.
Yeah. So, especially with me, like, I mean, you've probably gathered from the way I've been talking about this that I would definitely recommend it. It's a show. If you watch just the first season of it, you might think that you liked it, but it wasn't anything that like really wows you. But even if you're somebody that maybe doesn't fall in love with it by the very end, I highly encourage you to, definitely keep a hold on to it. Make sure it's in your mind for when the second season comes out, or even just diving into the novels, because the story just gets better and better. It's in a way, it's more like an origin story trying to establish Belle's start as an adventurer, because up to this point, like before the first season, he is technically an adventurer, but he's not an successful adventurer. So this is kind of an origin story getting into his adventurer status. And as an origin story, I think it's really good, and I would recommend it. And it's something that I would recommend just to see where it goes later, because I can see so many directions that they can take this that would be an awesome experience to watch.
As far as recommendation for me, I really like the show. It's kind of unfortunate that it has such a long and terrible name that has really nothing to do with what the show's about.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think Josh can agree with that.
Yeah, it's like, what show have you been watching lately? Oh, I watch Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls Adventure? Like, what kind of sick stuff are you into? But I mean, it's like, and honestly, like, you don't get that vibe at all when you watch it.
Yeah,
So,
it's a great adventure show. I'd recommend it for people. It does get dark. It's
yes.
not going to be happy all the time, and especially moving forward under the 6 books that we reviewed, it does get a little bit more dark and more serious. But it's a great time, a great show to watch, and I'd recommend checking it out and waiting for the second season like everyone else.
Yeah, because if you definitely like action or fantasies, this is the thing for you. But I think this will about do it for our cover of the first season of DanMachi, and we'll try to have more videos for anime and light novels and all your other entertainment news. So stay tuned, addicts.